Could we engineer an artificial planet? Chapter 1. Blueprints for a World. The first sunrise over a human-made planet would not be a quiet thing. It would arrive like a standing ovation after centuries of rehearsal. Light climbing over engineered peaks, wind rushing through planted forests, oceans waking with the synchronized swell of artificial tides. It would be the culmination of a long bet our species once whispered to itself on dark nights, that stone and vacuum and math could be persuaded to love us back. To picture that morning honestly, we must first ask a sobering question, the only serious one that matters at the beginning of such a tale. Could we engineer an artificial planet? Not a modest space station, not a rotating cylinder dressed in pastoral wallpaper. Those are splendid machines for living, but they are not worlds. The question is bolder. Could we take the raw materials scattered between the orbits of Mars and Jupiter, or among the frozen reaches beyond Neptune, and assemble something that behaves like a planet? With gravity you feel in your bones, with air that keeps its promises, with weather and seasons, with a deep hidden heat that makes mountains restless and oceans speak in their sleep? Could we raise a world? To approach this without naivete, we have to lay out the constraints that physics hands us with the indifference of a ledger. A planet is not merely a place to stand, it is an orchestra of forces tuned across time. Start with gravity, the silent conductor. Your body knows 1 gram intimately, even if your mind only greets it when coffee spills. Gravity decides whether an atmosphere clings or leaks, whether rivers carve valleys or frost clings forever in sunless craters, and called whether children will run with a gait that looks human or in a light-footed lilt that evolution never rehearsed. Gravity, in the familiar sense, comes from mass. We can fake the sensation by spinning habitats, and indeed, for the past century of design studies, we have, but spin is not gravity. Spin is a useful illusion, a local trick. It pulls you sideways into a ring, and the illusion breaks the moment you let go of your coffee mug, and it sails along a curved path that feels wrong. Spin is a beautiful lie. Gravity is the quiet truth. So, if we want a world with true gravity, we need mass. A lot of mass. Here the numbers become daunting. Earth is heavy beyond everyday intuition. The entire industrial output of our species, spread across centuries, would not add up to a rounding error next to the weight of a small moon. But planet is a flexible category. We do not need to make an Earth. Perhaps we aim for a Ceres-class world, or something heftier, call it a seed world, large enough to hold an atmosphere for geologic spans if tended, small enough that we can plausibly assemble it from available rock and ice without redecorating the solar system. Mass is the first pillar of any plan. The second is structure. A pile of rubble is not a world. It is a mood. We need internal cohesion. Real planets self-assemble by gravity. Their interiors differentiate. Heavy stuff sinks, light stuff floats until they settle into a state that can survive impacts, flex with tides, and shrug at the occasional tantrum from nearby stars. We cannot wait millions of years for that soothing process. We would have to cheat. A third pillar is heat. A world must be warm on the inside and regulated on the outside. The inside heat drives geology, recycles carbon, whispers to volcanic arcs and hydrothermal vents, the creative restlessness that makes continents collide and drift and, ultimately, nurture diverse biomes. Outside, heat must be balanced. Too much sunlight, and your oceans vanish into the sky. Too little, and even love poems freeze. Worlds live on the knife edge between furnace and freezer, and that edge is thin. A fourth pillar is magnetism, the invisible shield that sends charged particles away, like a stern parent telling teenagers it's past curfew. Without a magnetic field, atmospheres erode, surfaces age quickly, electronics sulk. Magnetism is not essential for habitability in the short term if other protections are engineered, but over centuries it matters. Worlds without such shields must compensate with other stubbornness. The fifth pillar is hydrology. Water does not simply exist, it moves, cycles, and remembers. It stores heat, sculpts, seethes. It resists uniformity, gathering in basins, evaporating in desert heat, condensing into fog that threads through trees like ghostly silk. A world without a living water cycle is a museum. We are not building a museum. The sixth pillar is atmosphere. Its composition, pressure, and patience. Under assault from lost processes, air thick enough to breathe, thin enough to make weather interesting rather than murderous. Air that carries the smell of pine and sea, not the acrid sigh of a failing scrubber. The seventh is time. A world endures. Its beauty lies in its slowness. Rivers gnawing at stone, seasons cycling, endemic species learning to sing the geography. We must design not just a first day, but 1,000 honest tomorrows. Finally, the eighth pillar is meaning, why we would attempt this, what governance and ethics could keep a project from turning our ambitions into new tyrannies. We will return to this last pillar because no machine, no matter how grand, escapes the politics of its makers. For now, let us stay with rock and ice. 3 ways to raise a world. There are 3 archetypes for human-made worlds, and understanding them is how we choose our path. The first archetype is the habitat machine. O'Neill cylinders, Bernal spheres, Bishop rings rotating habitats that create comfortable pseudo-gravity and handle air, water, and farming with the elegance of a closed ecological loop. They are marvels of engineering and imagination, and they are much closer to our reach than a true planet. But they are not worlds. They are ships that never land. For many dreams, that is enough. For this book's question, it is not. The second archetype is the roofed world, sometimes called a world house. Here we take a small body, say an airless moonlet or a dwarf planet, and wrap it in a transparent, pressure-bearing shell, a global greenhouse. Imagine a lattice of carbon composites and glass hung like a lantern shade around a rocky sphere, with structural hoops anchored into the bedrock. Inside, atmosphere is tamed rather than courted, trapped rather than wooed. The gravity is low unless the underlying body is large, but life unfolds on a surface under open sky, the stars visible through the roof at night. We create climate with mirrors and shades, shepherd winds with controlled pressure gradients, hold in the air that would otherwise escape. It is not gravity-rich, but it is planet-like, and it scales. The third archetype is the seed world. Assemble so much mass that gravity itself becomes our partner. We build a small planet, not an Earth, no, but a world with G, perhaps 1/3 to 1/2 of Earth's, enough to hold an atmosphere for long periods if we choose the right chemistry and temperature ranges. This route is audacious. It is also the only one that fully satisfies the honest sense of the word planet. And each archetype teaches something essential. Habitats show us how to make ecosystems closed and resilient, how to grow food in sealed volumes, recycle water until it sings. Roofed worlds teach us global civil engineering at scales that make present bridges look like jewelry. Seed worlds teach patience and ambition, for to move 100 trillion tons of rock is to measure your life in centuries even as you hurry. For the rest of this chapter, we will sketch a plausible seed world and visit a roofed variant, because together they bracket a spectrum of strategies. In Chapter 2, we will reckon with politics, ecology, culture, and the economy of such undertakings, and we will face the question of whether we should attempt them at all. Choosing a neighborhood. The first decision in raising a world is location. Location is not merely weather. Location decides which materials you can gather cheaply, which sunlight you receive without mirrors the size of continents, which radiation bath your world must endure, and which nearby gravity wells will charge you tolls for transport. Consider the asteroid belt. Here, between Mars and Jupiter, live the ruins of a planet that never was iron cores, carbonaceous rubble, silicate boulders, declaiming silently the story of the early solar system. There is enough mass to build several seed worlds the size of Ceres. If your patience matches your ambition, there is abundant water locked in minerals and as ice in some bodies. Sunlight is weaker than at Earth, but strong enough to work with mirrors that do not beggar the imagination. The major hazard is Jupiter's gravitational meddling and the swarm of wanderers it stirs. The advantage is that the local gravity is gentle. Moving stuff around is cheap once you get used to the choreography. Then consider the realm beyond Neptune, where the Kuiper belt and scattered disk hold ancient ice in quantities that make the word vast shuffle its feet. There is material to spare, but sunlight is a rumor, and heat must mostly be our gift. Sealing the sky above a world there would demand mirrors so grand they would need names. Yet the night would be majestic, dark enough to remember. Finally, there are inner system options. Mercury is a banquet of metals sitting in a sunlit furnace. The moon is a nearby quarry with a view of home, though its inventory of volatiles is modest and precious. Mars itself is tantalizing, but is not a blank slate. Terraforming a world is not the same as building one, and Mars deserves its own book. For a seed world, the asteroid belt is the most honest compromise. Water and rock are present in accessible forms. The sun is still a friend. The travel times between resources are measured in months, not years. Let us imagine a target orbit roughly midway between Mars and Jupiter, well away from mean motion resonances that would stir our world into a dangerous eccentricity. Space is like the sea. You do not moor your island in a storm track. Gathering the stone, we begin not by constructing but by herding. Think of 1,000,000 small tugs, a swarm of solar electric craft with patient engines and sails that sip sunlight, a flotilla of magnetic mass drivers anchored on the surface of suitable asteroids. They work non-stop, their schedules arranged by an AI that thinks in orbits and delta-V budgets the way a good chef thinks in heat and time. We select bodies not for their glamour but for their chemistry. Carbonaceous chondrites for water and organics, metallic asteroids for structural metals, silicate rubble for bulk. Each tug attaches, warms the target if necessary to dislodge clinging frost, and whispers momentum into its bones, steering it onto a trajectory that intersects the assembly zone at walking speed a few years later. Nothing arrives fast. Speed is expensive. We are midwives, not meteors. As mass trickles in, we begin to assemble a gravitational seed, perhaps a captured family of a dozen large bodies bound with tether systems thick as subway tunnels, wrapped gradually in impact-absorbing regolith blankets. The composite object rotates gently for stability, and after each arrival, we melt seams with concentrated sunlight and electromagnetic induction, fusing pieces into a self-gripping puzzle. Gravity helps once the seed grows. Rocks want to cuddle in space if you give them the chance. But a rubble pile is fragile. We must sinter. Excess metals are smelted in vacuum furnaces powered by vast solar arrays, extruded into rebar and strands that weave through the nascent world like the bones of a titan. We do not build a monolithic sphere that way lies brittleness, but rather a stratified aggregate, with engineered fault zones and shear layers that guide stress the way architects guide rain off a roof. We learn from Earth. Let the plates move. Just make them move where you expect. As the mass grows, so does gravity. At first, nothing holds air. Later, mist lingers in craters. Then fog sits in basins. You can tell a seed world is maturing when a slow exhale condenses into a ground-hugging cloud and stubbornly refuses to flee to the horizon, lighting the sky. Even with ambition, our world will be small compared to Earth. With modest gravity, some gases leak over time simply because molecules are impetuous. We choose an atmosphere composition that forgives us. Nitrogen and oxygen are staples, but we consider heavier buffer gases, perhaps adding some argon, perhaps crafting a balance that places more emphasis on partial pressures than on total density. We plan temperature carefully. Cooler air leaks more slowly. Yet we want a planet where evenings are for walking in shirt sleeves, not parkas. Here, sunlight is precious. We build mirrors, thin films, expertly tensioned in elegant trusses, parked as statites that hover with the help of light pressure, or installed as circumplanetary rings that look like the ornaments of a god. The mirrors do not simply pour light down. They sculpt climate. By tilting and dimming on seasonal cycles, we imitate the tilt of an axial season, even if our world's spin is modest. We draw winter and summer with a pen of photons. Weather is a symphony. We conduct it gently, giving randomness room to play, making a sea that stays. We add water. Much of it comes embedded in minerals, released in kilns that smell faintly of primordial chemistry. Some arrives as imported ice nuggets that we shepherd down like delicate guests. Water does not stay where you pour it. It seeks the shape of gravity. We design basins as if they were instruments, deep, cold oceans to store heat, shallow continental seas to grow light-filled ecologies. We carve spillways that will age into fjords. We set aside deserts on purpose. Diversity of climate is not cruelty. It is the mother of invention. Water binds with rock and air in a triad. To keep an atmosphere friendly for centuries, carbon must cycle. On Earth, weathering locks CO2 into rocks while volcanism exhales it back when the climate starts to shiver toward eternal cold. Our seed world needs a slow exhale too. We can fake volcanism with deep industrial fumaroles that run on controlled fusion, but that would make our world a ward of machines. Better is to give it interior heat and let it heave, a heart that beats. True planets are warm inside. That warmth comes from radioactive decay and the residual heat of formation. We can supply both delicately. Radioisotopes are not toys. They must be placed so that their decay feeds convection rather than danger. We do not pour plutonium into the core. We build distributed heat engines, gradients maintained by exothermic chemistry, and carefully placed isotopic heaters insulated from biospheres by kilometers of rock. The aim is not to recreate Earth's dynamo exactly. Our world is smaller, its core different, but to encourage long-term tectonic coquetry. Subduction-like cycles in slow motion, modest volcanism, and the kind of plate circulation that refreshes the surface over millennia. If a magnetic field emerges as a byproduct, we celebrate. If it does not, we have another trick. Superconducting loops laid along latitudes, carrying currents that generate a global magnetic cocoon. The technology is stern, maintenance is non-negotiable, and the field would differ in character from a molten iron dynamo, but physics does not forbid it. A lifeless rock is inert. A human-made planet can be, paradoxically, more alive in its agency, because we can choose how its invisible armor is worn. Holding the air. Atmospheres leak in three main ways: sputtering by solar wind, thermal escape by the fastest molecules in the tail of the distribution, and catastrophic loss from impacts. We address each with layered defenses, magnetic shielding, and perhaps a thin exosphere of deliberately introduced heavy, noble gases reduce sputtering. Temperature and composition choices manage thermal escape. Impact management demands an active orbital defense, a halo of watchful satellites with kinetic interceptors to nudge threatening objects into safer orbits years before they would trouble us. It's the cosmic equivalent of public health, cheap when early, bitterly expensive when late. At the surface, we design a planet that breathes. Plants and microbes do metabolic magic. Soils and clays swallow and release. We seed ecosystems in staged campaigns. Hardy lichens and microbial mats first, then gray-green pioneers curled low against the wind, then forests that hold their own storms inside their crowns. We do not import wolves and songbirds in the first decade. A planet's lungs must grow before it can sing. Weather, seasons, and the poetry of place. A sky must move. We learned long ago, experimenting in space stations, that closed ecologies resist stagnation if you invite them to dance. We set our world spinning not too quickly, not so slowly that day lengths become punishing, and we tune the mirror ballet above to give it seasons. In the early years, weather will be mercurial. Young worlds are moody. You learn their temperaments the way a sailor learns a new sea. We watch for persistent patterns, fog deserts, storm alleys, mountain waves that make the air yodel over ridges. We place cities where the sky is kind and the geology long-sighted. We leave wild belts wide enough to keep our own ambitions humble. We will be tempted to turn knobs constantly, to fix every heat wave and arrest every drought. We must resist the imperial instinct to over-control. A good steward of a world sets boundaries and allows the system to find its own resilience. Think of it as bonsai at planetary scale. You prune. You do not turn the tree into a topiary caricature of a cloud, the roofed variant. Some will argue that this is all too slow. They will prefer the roofed world. Take a mid-sized moonlet, something with intriguing terrain but no air and arch over it. A global roof. The roof is not a single sheet. It is a mosaic of framings and panels that flex like whale ribs. It may be clear, tinted, or dynamically modulated by embedded shutters. Internal pressure holds it aloft, with anchors that bite into bedrock like dragon's teeth. Inside, you set pressure to a comfortable level, keep oxygen at a safe fraction, and let weather unfold in a tamed sandbox. The roof keeps air in, micrometeoroids out, and allows night to be borrowed when daytime overstays its welcome. Beneath, you can stand under an honest sky, Watch artificial constellations and teach your children the names of mountain ranges you poured with your hands. Gravity is low, but that itself becomes culture. Sports evolve. That would be impossible at 1 gram. Architecture grows into vaults and leaps. Biology adapts. This route is not a consolation prize. It is a different way of being a world. Yet even a roofed world must respect scale. The larger the span, the more it behaves like a violin string you cannot let buzz. Materials matter, and maintenance is a vow. For a species that tends bridges, dams, and power grids religiously, this vow is not beyond us. For a species that sometimes leaves infrastructure to rust while arguing about who pays, it is a moral test as much as a technical one. How long? How hard? How many hands? The most honest answer to how long is generations. But there is a human kind of time inside that answer. Many stages of a seed world offer livable dividends early. You do not have to wait for the 100 millionth ton of air to arrive to walk under a dawn. Early valleys can be pressurized with local roof systems. Lakes can be born in their own basins. Towns can test the seasons while the mirrors above are still learning their choreography. A planetary project is not all scaffolds and no homes. People will live on the construction site, the way they once lived in gold rush towns. There will be children for whom the smell of fresh regolith after rain is the scent of childhood. In terms of difficulty, picture every large project we have done: global internet, continental railways, microchip supply chains, a web of satellites, and then imagine a braid that combines their complexity. Hard, yes. Impossible, no. The main barriers are not in the periodic table, but in coordination and patience. We will have to become a species that keeps promises across centuries and resists the seductions of short-term glory. What could go wrong, and how to be honest about it. If you build a world, you must be frank about ruin. Impact risks rise as a world's cross-section grows. The very mirrors that nourish your climate can break in storms of micrometeoroids and become dangerous glitter. A magnetic shield can falter and let a solar tantrum cook your circuits. Ecosystems can tip into a monotony that looks green but is brittle, the way a plantation is green but not a forest. And there is that most human of failures, losing interest. Worlds die not only by physics, but by the bankruptcy of attention. Risk is not a curse. It is a call to design, distributed redundancy, graceful degradation, ecosystems that can sulk and recover rather than shatter. Education as infrastructure. Everyone who lives on a made world must know how their sky is held up, how their rivers are persuaded to run. Romance will take care of itself. Knowledge must be courted intentionally. Why bother? Why reach for such extravagance at all when there are wounds yet to heal on the planet that bore us? Because the skills required to build a world are the same skills required to heal one. Humility before systems, reverence for feedback loops, patience, a love of maintenance, because the act of building an artificial planet forces a culture to become long-sighted or fail. Because in the attempt to build a world, we might rediscover the vows that keep one. And yes, because wonder is not a frivolity. A child who grows up knowing that their grandparents helped shepherd an asteroid into a gentle orbit will care differently about how a river bends. Awe is not a luxury add-on to civilization. It is fuel, a morning at the edge of tomorrow. Let us return, briefly, to that first sunrise. It may come sooner over a roofed valley on a small, low-gravity world. A clear panel blooms from night to day as shutters unlace, revealing a star poured onto rocks that were airless the previous generation. The light tips across a lake that did not exist in the age of your parents. Wind wakes, born of pressure differences not in the general circulation, but in the local geometry of hill and shore, and it carries the smell of a moss species engineered to love basalt. Someone opens a window. They have windows here because roofs make that possible, and the sound that comes in is uncomplicated. Water on stone, a small bird's rehearsal of a song learned from a library of birds we brought, modified to take delight in low-gravity leaps. A grandparent places a cup on a railing and the steam rises with a personality all its own, persistent in the gentle weight of this world. If you drop the cup, it falls not with the thud you expect, but it falls. The difference between illusion and truth is in such drops. On the seed world, the first sunrise over a fully open, unroofed valley may take longer to arrive, but when it comes, it will be a declaration that light will touch mountains that have never known shadow before, because only now do they exist as mountains rather than heaps. Mists will gather in folds, not designed by us but permitted by our boundaries. A child will run downhill, discovering what 0.4 grams means not as a number, but as laughter. Could we engineer an artificial planet? If we means a species willing to grow up in its engineering ethics as much as in its laboratories, then yes, in the honest sense that matters. Within the stretch of centuries that human stories can hold, with intermediate milestones that are beautiful and useful, with risks acknowledged and mitigated, with humility that does not posture as false modesty, the blueprints exist not as single schematics, but as families of strategies. Seed worlds that court gravity, roofed worlds that cradle air, and the agile habitats that will tend both while they rise. In the next chapter, we will set aside the romance of rock and return to the question of who gets to live on such a world, who pays, who decides, and how to ensure that the act of building a planet does not license us to behave like gods. We will walk through economy, ecology, culture, and law. We will ask not merely whether we could, but whether we should, and if the answer is yes, on what terms. For now, carry this with you. The engineering of a planet begins not with cranes and thrusters, but with a vow to keep the long promises that true places ask of their makers. Chapter 2. The Terms of a New Sky. Suppose the rock is ready. Not finished worlds never are, but ready enough to test a home. Thin blue air humming in the hollows, lakes that hold the memory of wind in ripples, mirrors in the high dark, adjusting their angle with an orchestral discipline. Suppose the seed world has a name the children pronounce with pride and the elders speak softly, as if handling a candle in a draught. Suppose, in other words, that the engineering has achieved the first honest threshold. What happens next is harder. Raising a world is only half a feat. The other half is becoming the people who can live there without turning it into a monument to our impatience. The tools we need now are not cranes and tugs, but charters and customs. In this chapter, we will be unromantic about things that slogans dislike: law, equity, governance, economy, culture, and memory. A world is the sum of its promises kept. The first law: no one owns a sunrise. The founding argument begins at the horizon. Who owns a world that we build? There is a temptation, old as conquest, to claim a planet the way an early flag once claimed a coast. We must refuse that habit. A built world is not a prize, it is a trust. The law must say so, and say it early, before the first surveyor's stakes go into the ground. Think of a planetary trust charter written into the world's constitution and mirrored in its physical infrastructure. In plain language, it would say, "This world is a commons in perpetuity. No corporation, state, or person may claim absolute title to land, light, air, or water. Stewardship is granted through leases conditioned on maintenance, safety, ecological restoration, and social contribution. The living systems of the world, soil networks, watersheds, skies possess standing in law. Guardians may speak for them. Decisions with long shadow those affecting climate, magnetism, hydrology, and population require consent across generations, not just across election cycles. This is not sentimentality. It is insurance. Planetary scale systems punish short-term profit maximization with long-term ruin. Law must be the memory we keep when the markets forget. The second law. No terra nullius in space. We must also insist there is no nobody's land, because there is no nobody's future. Every act on a world affects people not yet born. The Charter recognizes future citizens as stakeholders with a veto over actions that irreversibly foreclose their options. Practically, this is implemented with an intergenerational council whose members are selected not by popularity contests, but by demonstrated fluency in long-term systems ecology, infrastructure, ethics, risk, and who serve terms long enough to think beyond fashion, but short enough to be corrigible by the living. The Council's authority is specific. It cannot decide daily policy, but it can pause or require redesign of projects that would deplete groundwater aquifers, alter atmospheric composition beyond agreed bounds, decommission magnetic shielding without replacement, or grow the population faster than food and shelter resiliencies permit. Its power is the power to say, not yet, not like this. Borders you can't see. In space, we learn that the most important borders are invisible. System boundaries drawn around air loops, nutrient cycles, energy flows. The old map makers traced lines on land, the new ones draw circuits. Every settlement on a made world is licensed according to its balance sheet of flows. To earn a long lease, a town must demonstrate closed-loop competence, water recycled at agreed efficiency, nitrogen and phosphorus tracked with less loss each year, energy buffered for dark times, waste transformed into feedstock, and air treated as a shared treasury. Not an exhaust pipe. Audits are not punitive spectacles, but public rituals, festivals of accountability where schools tour the city's stomach, the city's lungs, and the city's bones, learning how their home eats, breathes, and heals. An economy that knows its atoms. The economy of a small world must account for atoms, not merely money. Currency is useful, but you cannot buy phosphorus from a bank if the last kilogram is already in a landfill you have not built yet. Therefore, alongside a normal currency, the world runs an element ledger, an open, tamper-evident registry of critical elements and compounds, carbon in soils, nitrogen in air and biomass, water in aquifers and pipes, rare metals in the grid tracked across extraction, use, recovery, and reserve. This is not bureaucracy for its own sake. It is civilization choosing to see the actual game it is playing. The ledger underwrites a circular dividend. Households and firms receive periodic distributions when the global recovery ratios exceed targets. In other words, the better you collectively are at returning atoms to useful cycles, the richer everyone becomes. This aligns street-level incentives with planetary health. It is much easier to cooperate when there is a festival on the other end of your good behavior. Energy, the three-heart strategy. Every world needs a heart that does not skip. Energy cannot be a single point of failure. The engineering plan chooses redundancy. 3 hearts, sunlight heart, orbital mirrors and surface arrays feed a basal grid. The mirrors are not merely power plants. They are weather instruments. Their pointing schedules are publicly posted and reviewable. Their control algorithms are dual-keyed, one held by the grid authority, one by the Intergenerational Council, to prevent unilateral climate steering for private advantage. Heat heart, subsurface thermal networks that harvest the slow warmth of decay heaters and store surplus electricity as heat in phase change vaults. This gives nights and storms a softness. The grid breathes. Fire heart, compact fusion, when available. Until then, high-temperature reactors using fuels chosen for safety and waste profile, sited under kilometers of rock, with fail-safes that default to silence rather than to noise. Waste pathways are designed at the same time as the plants. No, we'll figure it out later. 3 hearts beat in a syncopated rhythm. If one falters, the others hum louder, not forever, but long enough to repair without panic. Panic is the enemy of good decisions. Food, agriculture that plays all the octaves. On a young world, the temptation is to plant rectangles of familiarity, rows of terrestrial confidence. We should, but we must also learn the octaves we ignored on Earth. Polycultures that behave like conversation, fungi that write long letters through soil, insectaries that host pollination as a living festival. Farms become mosaics, some under roofs, some under sky, some vertical, some sprawling and hedged, some aquatic. The goal is not maximal yield this year, but a choir of systems that overlap in such ways that failure in one becomes feedstock for resilience in another. The Charter grants sovereign soils areas that cannot be paved or enclosed, corridors that let pollinators and seed winds travel without passports. If a city wishes to expand, it must grow upward or earn enough restoration credits elsewhere to offset soil lost. You cannot pay with cash to bury a living system. You must pay with life given back. Who gets to live here? This question aches. If a world is a commons, is it open to all? Physics says no. Every world has carrying capacities that are not insults but facts. How much sunlight, how much water, how much heat, how much patience. The most just policy is also the strictest. Population growth is tied to infrastructure growth, and both are tied to ecological benchmarks recorded openly by sensors anyone can read. Admission policies balance several priorities. Repairers first. People whose skills tend infrastructure. Electricians, ecologists, medics, teachers, machinists, cooks, caretakers. Not because others are lesser, but because a young world is a hospital, not a gallery. Refuge and restitution. A defined share of new resident slots reserved for refugees from disasters elsewhere. Planetary projects cannot be lifeboats only for the lucky. Their moral license depends on service. Lottery of wonder. Beyond skill and refuge allocations, a non-transferable lottery lets ordinary lives make extraordinary home. You do not buy your way into the sky. You are invited by a draw that treats dignity as a baseline, not a luxury. Citizenship is earned by a stewardship year, 12 months of tending something bigger than yourself: soil, water, grid, clinic, school, documented by the people you serve, not by your supervisors. Service builds the habit of maintenance that keeps worlds from becoming toys of the powerful. Rites and rituals. The charter is dry. Culture must be wet. Rites need rituals. The world adopts ceremonies that encode its physics into memory. On the first snowfall each year, if your latitude is blessed with snow, children carry glass jars to collect the first clean flakes. And in classrooms, they melt them and test pH, nitrates, particulates, and oxygen. Science is not a rumor. It is a game you play with your own hands. On night of quiet mirrors, the orbital reflectors dim to starlight for an hour, and the world sees itself under the true sun and true night, remembering that a sky is a gift, not a guarantee. Funerals have a return of atoms. Each person chooses a return path in life, a tree they will feed, a stream they will clear for a decade, a metal they will relinquish back to the ledger. Death becomes an accounting that uplifts. On a made world, matter is sacred because it is scarce. Rites must teach that sacredness without scolding. Language of low gravity. Culture changes under different gravity. We will walk differently. We will speak differently. Words will be invented for the way steam rises, for the bounce-turn gait of children learning to run, for the sudden silence when a mirror's shadow passes over a valley. Sports emerge that could not exist under the old weight vault ball, with trajectories like calligraphy, river skimming with fins like dragonflies. Architecture becomes vaulted, playful, learning from Gothic cathedrals and termite mounds, structures that love air currents and light. Language itself adopts new metaphors. On earth we say down to earth to mean practical. Here we might say well-weighted. By the ledger will mean honest. Hold the mirror will mean be fair. When culture maps its virtue onto the mechanics of its sky, rules become habits. Policing the sky, traffic, debris, and defense. Orbit is a city. Without governance, it becomes a junkyard with bullets. The world operates a harbor mastery over nearby space, a cooperative traffic service with published lanes, reserved debris, budgets, strict deorbit guarantees, and a right of inspection for vehicles whose orbits intersect the mirror rings or the magnetic coil arrays. The law is unpopular with pirates and short-sighted bosses. It is beloved by children who like looking up without fear. Defense is modest but non-negotiable. Radar and optical nets watch for rocks, and small shepherd craft, pre-positioned along likely lanes, can nudge threats years before they matter. The unit emblem is a broom. They are paid to clean, not to fight. The only weapons are Delta V and early notice. Biosecurity. Without paranoia, a young world must fear both plague and boredom. Its biosphere is a delicate choreography. Introduce an aggressive stowaway, and diversity collapses. But shut everything out, and you freeze evolution, ending with a museum of green silence. The answer is porous guardianship, gateways that test, quarantine that teaches, and a culture that treats no, not as punishment, but as the price of a long party. Travelers bring microbes. That is what travelers do. The world's ports therefore run clinics as first-class institutions with storytellers and music alongside HEPA filters. A good quarantine is a festival of courteous waiting. When new species are proposed for introduction, the process is public. Hazard maps, trial plots under micro-roofs, monitoring by volunteers, garden clubs with lab skills. If a species proves too forward, the world has protocols to curtail it without cruelty, containment, redirection, offering it roles where its appetite can be useful. Education as infrastructure. Schools are not buildings. They are rivers that carry understanding forward. On a made world, schools teach planetacy the way Earth taught literacy. Every citizen learns the grammar of heat, the syntax of water, the punctuation of wind. A 10-year-old can sketch the energy budget of their village on a napkin. A 12-year-old can explain why the mirrors tilt in autumn and what that means for the frost line in the cornfields. A 15-year-old can repair a sensor, test soil, and argue respectfully with a council member about the nitrogen quota. Apprenticeships braid with academics. There is no honor without useful skill. The arts are not decoration, they are feedback loops that translate data into feeling. Musicians write symphonies based on the ledger's atom flows. Painters work with iron oxides from local soils. Poets compose mirror sonnets, 14 lines, each marking a minute of the night of quiet mirrors. Work and worth. Wages on a made world pay in 3 currencies: money for exchange, time for leisure, and acknowledgement for community. Acknowledgement is recorded publicly in a book of thanks. The names of those who repaired the canal in a winter storm, the nurses who held hands in a bad week, the crew who climbed into the undercity to patch a heat pipe. Children read from the book in school assemblies. Teenagers hear their parents' names and learn what pride feels like when it is earned by repair. Work rotations prevent brittle hierarchies. Even executives spend a week, a year, doing maintenance outside their comfort zones, clearing inlets, teaching first aid, sorting compost, riding night shift with the grid crew. Management is humble or it is replaced. Justice. The difference between accident and negligence. On a world where every atom matters, accidents are expensive and anger is cheap. Justice systems learn to distinguish between honest mistake and culpable neglect. Honest mistake. A novice misreads a meter and the team catches the error before harm. The response? Training, stories, a community lunch. Culpable neglect. A contractor falsifies mirror maintenance logs. A manager silences a safety complaint. The response? Public trial, removal from positions of trust, restitution, not just in money but in service years. Courts are open. Proceedings are recorded not as drama for export but as lessons for the future. If shame is used, it is specific and proportional. If forgiveness is offered, it is paired with new guardrails. The law refuses to be an instrument of spectacle. Worlds die when justice becomes a show. Art, religion, and the unnameable. Not everything can be audited. People will pray under this sky. They will dance. They will mourn the kinds of losses that graphs cannot comfort. A made world must make room for the unmeasurable without letting it govern the measurable. Temples and quiet houses arise, some secular, some sacred. There are chaplains for the grid crew and for the farms. There are secular counselors who train in grief for when a storm takes a roof. The world's holidays mix the physical and the sublime. Day of first floods, when canals are opened each spring and paper lanterns shaped like raindrops are floated. Names of winds, when children rename the local gusts with words they invent. There is a rule unwritten but widely known. Do not lie about physics in the name of comfort, but do not use physics as a club against wonder. A good world is bilingual, money without extraction. Finance is oxygen if it circulates, and poison if it pools. The world forbids extractive rents on essentials, no price gouging on water, air, or basic shelter. Land cannot be held empty as a speculation. Leases lapse if they are not loved. Investment is welcomed but tied to care clauses. If you fund a factory, you fund its decommissioning plan on day one. If you fund a mine, you fund soil recovery. If you fund a city block, you pay into the arts and clinic on the same street. There are planetary bonds, long-dated instruments that pay modest coupons indexed to ecological performance. Pension funds buy them, not because they are flashy, but because a safe harbor with clean water is the most conservative investment imaginable. The richest person on a made world is the one most trusted to maintain something everyone needs. Governance that can say, "We were wrong." Democracy is not a brand. It is an operating system that must be patched. The world uses layered deliberation, town halls for local matters, a planetary assembly chosen by mixed methods, sortition, lottery, expertise seats with strict conflict of interest rules, and elected delegates who spend half their term under evaluation by randomly selected citizen juries. No one style of selection can become a monopoly on legitimacy. This is messy by design. Monocultures of power invite famine. A prominent feature is the revision day. Every 5 years, the world pauses non-essential activity for 48 hours to review policies that have underperformed. Data is published. Children build exhibits that explain the failures without cynicism. Adults attend workshops on how to disagree better. At the end, the assembly and councils propose patches. The most important phrase in public life becomes, "We were wrong. Here is how we will fix it." The phrase is not a confession, it is a competence, memory, and forgetting. A made world must decide what to remember and what to forget. We cannot keep everything. Storage is not infinite, and attention less so. Archivists work with gardeners. History is pruned, not to hide shame, but to keep it readable. Raw logs feed the ledger. Curated stories feed the culture. There are halls of first small museums in every town holding one object that mattered early. The first spade that turned soil in this valley. The glove worn by the child who planted the 5,000th tree. The cracked mirror panel that taught engineers humility. These are not relics. They are arguments for perseverance. We also institutionalize merciful forgetting, pardons for debtors who failed without fraud, time limits on reputational penalties for minor mistakes, data expiry for personal records that no longer serve safety. A world that cannot forgive becomes a museum of grudges. What about Earth? We do not build new worlds to abandon the old one. The skills we practice here, long-term thinking, respect for cycles, the engineering of empathy into law, are the exact skills Earth begs us to learn. Part of the charter requires return missions, crews and knowledge sent back down the well to help repair rivers, restore soils, unbuild the unwise, and teach the lessons won at high cost. If a made world becomes an island of smugness afloat on a sea of sorrow, it will have failed its creators. A day in the middle years. Let us imagine a day, not the first sunrise, but a good, ordinary day, a century in. The world is young by geologic standards, but thick with its own routines. In the city of Tres Arcadas, named for 3 natural arches that survived from the rubble pile, day's morning begins with bells powered by heat differentials between sunlit and shaded towers, a quiet music of physics. Streets are slow. Nobody honks because there is nothing to honk. Trams glide. People walk. Delivery drones mutter like bees. At the market, a board displays the atom ledger in colors. Nitrogen recovery at 93%, applause emoji. Phosphorus at 89%, work to do. Water debt paid down by a wet spring. A child tugs a sleeve. Why do we clap for nitrogen? The elder bends. Because it means the farms won't beg from the future. Here says no. In a workshop near the river, apprentices rebuild a heat exchanger. The master does not shout. She asks, if this fails on a cold night, which house freezes first? They point to the map, and whose grandmother sleeps there. They know her name. Systems thinking becomes empathy when you know the faces in the flowchart. At midday, the mirror's shading Tres Arcadas rotate 2 degrees. The temperature dips. The smell in the air changes. Someone on a balcony laughs because soup cooled just enough to eat. The night of quiet mirrors is months away, but small gestures of skycraft are sprinkled through the year to teach everyone the humility of dependence and the dignity of participation. On the radio, a poem. 14 lines, one for each minute of a recent solar flare, telling how the magnetic coils sang. In the afternoon, a public trial. A contractor underbid maintenance on a canal and covered it with glossy reports. The court listens to farmers whose water ran brown for a week. The verdict is careful. Restitution to the farms. A ban on bidding for 3 years. Mandatory service on a grid crew for a season. The contractor speaks. I wanted to look more competent than I was. I made the world pay for my vanity. The judge nods. You have said the quiet part out loud. Now fix what you broke. ESS. Evening finds the schools assembling in the amphitheater, carved into the cooled flow of an old basalt pour. It is names of winds. The littlest children shout suggestions. Quick step. Grandmother's whisper. The one that stole my hat, and the assembly votes. The names go into the map. Meteorologists grin. The science of streams of air grows a layer of play that makes it stick in memory. At night, 2 elders sit under the arch and argue tenderly about the ethics of calling this world ours. One says, we built it. The other says, so did gravity. They compromise. We coaxed it. Above them, a trail of slow light. Shepherd craft nudging a small, glinting stone into a safer lane. Someone sweeps the plaza. There is always sweeping. Failure and recovery. No story is complete without the dark. Worlds falter. A storm of micrometeoroids once shredded a ring of panels. A grid failure plunged the northern valleys into 4 days of hard cold. A fungus found a way into a seed bank and taught botanists humiliation. Each time, the question was not, who do we blame, but what do we change? After the mirror storm, debris budgets grew stricter. Shepherd craft multiplied. Insurance markets were redesigned to reward over-maintenance instead of penalizing it as waste. After the cold week, the heat heart doubled its reserve margins. Communities drilled better. After the fungus, seed banks scattered. No single vault could hoard hope again. Payne authored policy, and the policies stuck because they were rehearsed in public, not hidden under jargon. The end of the book. Not the end of the world. By now, the reader who wanted a blueprint may feel teased. Where are the CAD files? Where are the budgets? Those belong to other volumes. They are necessary, and they exist. This book is about the human work beneath the diagrams, the vows beneath the math. The question we began with, could we engineer an artificial planet, asked about stones and skies. The answer we are ending with asks about us. If we means a species that can write a charter and honor it, audit atoms without auditing joy out of life, teach children that nitrogen deserves applause, punish neglect without indulging cruelty, admit refugees without breaking the world that shelters them, confess error in public without losing face, and sweep the plaza every night because a clean commons is the first line of law, then yes, we could, not as an escape from the world that raised us, but as a rehearsal for loving it better, not as a monument to cleverness, but as a school for humility, not as a paradise paradises stagnate, but as a place with enough friction to make meaning. Let us close not at dawn, but at the hinge hour, when lamps and stars share the sky. A procession crosses a new bridge, a truss of quiet strength that arcs over a river born of melted, shepherded ice. At its midpoint stands a simple lectern, a child hair mussed by a wind, with a name reads from a sheet that will be archived but not worshipped. The words are the covenant of maintenance, repeated each year. We promise to keep. We promise to repair. We promise to count what matters and to share what we count. We promise to say, we were wrong out loud. We promise that no sunrise will be private, no river orphaned, no wind nameless for long. We promise, when we are tired, to ask for help, and when we are strong, to give it. We promise to belong to this sky as gently as it belongs to us. Somewhere beyond hearing, a shepherd craft changes a rock's mind. Somewhere in the dark, a coil hums its invisible protection. Somewhere nearby, an old person folds the covenant into a pocket and smiles, because this is not the first time a young voice made a promise to a place. The planet tilts, the mirrors breathe, the river remembers the glaciers it never knew, and the world ours because we coax it, not because we own it, spins on,